Welcome to Dear Fans. The sound of the door chime echoed through the quiet diner in the heart of San Diego as 28-year-old Grace Taylor wiped down the counter, trying to hold back tears. She had just spent her last $50 to buy a pair of shoes for a little boy who had come in barefoot, humiliated after his mother admitted they couldn't afford new ones. What she didn't know was that her quiet act of kindness would soon attract the attention of one of basketball's biggest stars, Caitlin Clark. It was a warm afternoon, and the diner was mostly empty save for Grace and the mother and son duo sitting by the window. Grace had been working here for 2 years after moving to California to escape a painful breakup, and while her life was far from glamorous, she prided herself on treating everyone with dignity. So when she noticed the little boy Ethan crying because he felt out of place among the well-dressed patrons, her heart broke. Hold on, she whispered gently to his mom, Lisa, who was visibly embarrassed. Grace disappeared into the back room and returned with a brand new pair of sneakers she had picked up during her lunch break. These are for you, she said, crouching down to help Ethan put them on. Lisa's eyes welled up as she tried to protest, but Grace waved her off. It's just shoes, she said with a soft smile, though her bank account was already near empty. Unbeknownst to her, the heartwarming moment had been captured by a tourist sitting a few tables away. The video, showing Grace's selfless act, quickly went viral. One of the millions who watched it was none other than Caitlin Clark, who happened to be in San Diego for an event. Caitlin had always been known for her generosity, but this story struck a personal chord. As a child, she had witnessed her own family struggles and knew how deeply moments of kindness could impact someone's life. Without hesitation, she decided she needed to meet Grace in person. That evening, as the sun set over the city, Grace was locking up the diner when a sleek black car pulled up. She froze as the door opened, and stepping out was none other than Caitlin Clark herself. Are you Grace? Caitlin asked, her voice warm and humble, her eyes filled with admiration. Grace blinked in disbelief, her mind racing. Yes, she stammered, not sure what was happening. I saw what you did for that little boy, Caitlin began, her voice steady but emotional. It reminded me of someone I knew once. Can I buy you a coffee? As they sat at a small cafe nearby, Caitlin listened intently to Grace's story, her struggles, her dreams, and the heartbreak that led her to San Diego for the first time in years. Grace felt truly seen, not just as the hardworking cashier everyone overlooked, but as a person with depth and value. Caitlin shared her own stories of hardship, of the pressure, the sacrifices, and the loneliness that sometimes came with success. You remind me, she said, pausing to gather her thoughts, that small acts of kindness can ripple out in ways we can't even imagine. Just as the conversation deepened, the cafe door swung open, and a familiar face stepped inside. Lisa and her son Ethan, who had come to thank Grace one more time. The reunion was filled with tears and laughter, but what no one expected was Caitlin's next move. She stood up as Ethan ran into Grace's arms, holding her like she was the safest place in the world. His small voice said, "Thank you for making me feel special." The simplicity of his words broke something deep inside Grace. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she hugged the boy tightly, while Lisa quietly mouthed, "You changed our lives." Caitlin watched, her heart heavy with a mix of admiration and a familiar ache. Grace, she thought, had given without expecting anything in return. With a deep breath, Caitlin looked at Lisa and Ethan. "What if I told you this isn't the end of your story?" she asked. "What if this is the beginning of something beautiful for all of us?" She pulled out her phone and made a call right there in the cafe, speaking softly to someone on the other end. Grace, Lisa, and Ethan exchanged confused glances as they tried to piece together what was happening. Moments later, Caitlin hung up, looking more determined than ever. "Grace," she said, her tone filled with both urgency and care, "do you trust me?" I don't know." Grace stammered. "What are you doing?" Caitlin smiled gently, standing up and motioning for them to follow her. "Sometimes life gives us a chance to start over. Let me be that chance for you." They hesitated, but eventually followed her outside, where the sleek black car was still waiting. Grace felt like she was in a dream, unsure of where this night would lead. As they climbed into the car, Caitlin made one promise: this isn't about charity, this is about love, the kind the world needs more of, and together we're going to change some lives, starting with yours. As the car went through the dimly lit streets of San Diego, Grace couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet understand. Caitlin sat beside her, her face a mix of quiet reflection and purpose. Finally, they arrived at a modest, yet elegant building downtown. "Where are we?" Grace asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Caitlin glanced back, her dark eyes soft but serious. "A place where stories like yours begin again." Inside, they were greeted by a warm, welcoming woman named Eleanor, who introduced herself as the director of a foundation Caitlin had secretly funded for years. It was a haven for single mothers, struggling families, and individuals who had fallen through the cracks of society. Grace's breath caught in her throat as Eleanor explained the purpose of the place. "We don't just help people survive, we help them thrive. Jobs, housing, education. We give them the tools they need to rewrite their stories." Caitlin turned to Grace, her voice breaking slightly. "This isn't charity, Grace. This is a thank you for reminding me of what really matters, for being the kind of person the world desperately needs." Grace's knees nearly gave out as the weight of it all hit her. She stared at Caitlin, tears streaming down her face. "Why me? I'm no one special." Caitlin stepped closer, her voice trembling. "You're wrong. You're exactly the kind of special the world forgets to see. And I've been where you are." Grace, feeling like nothing you do matters, like you're invisible. "But you're not. You saved that boy. You saved his mother. And whether you realize it or not, you've saved a piece of me too." Lisa, who had been silent, finally spoke, her voice raw with emotion. "You don't understand, Grace. That night you gave Ethan those shoes, I had left a goodbye note in my car. I thought he'd be better off without me." She choked back a sob as Grace turned to her, stunned. "But you saw us, you saw me, and it was enough to make me believe I could keep going." Grace was speechless, her heart breaking at the thought of Lisa's pain. She felt like she was standing on the edge of something vast and terrifying. But then Caitlin said something that would stay with her forever. "Sometimes all it takes is one person to see you, to remind you that you're not alone. That's what you've done for them. And now it's your turn to be seen." Before Grace could respond, Eleanor stepped forward with a small box in her hands. She handed it to Grace, who opened it to find a key inside. "This is your new home," Eleanor said gently. "A fresh start." Grace's hands shook as she held the key, her mind reeling. But the surprises weren't over yet. Caitlin knelt down to Ethan, who had woken up again, was rubbing his sleepy eyes. "Hey, buddy," she said with a kind smile. "How would you like to spend a day on a basketball court with me?" Ethan's face lit up, his tiny hands clasping together in excitement. Lisa let out a laugh, light and free, like a weight had been lifted from her soul. But just as the moment settled into joy, Grace turned to Caitlin, her voice breaking. "Why are you doing all of this? What's in it for you?" Caitlin looked at her with an intensity that made Grace's chest tighten. "Because I know what it feels like to lose everything," Caitlin said softly, "and I know how much it means when someone gives you a reason to hope again." Her voice faltered, and for the first time that night Grace saw something vulnerable in her. "There was someone once," Caitlin hesitated, "someone who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I couldn't save her, but maybe this is my way of honoring her." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hung in the air like a fragile thread. Grace wanted to ask more, to dig deeper into the pain Caitlin was so clearly carrying, but something told her this wasn't the time. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you." Caitlin smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "You don't owe me anything, Grace. Just promise me you'll keep being the light you are." That night they sat together, Caitlin, Grace, Lisa, and Ethan, laughing, crying, and sharing pieces of their lives they hadn't spoken of in years. And though the pain in their hearts lingered for the first time in a long time, it felt like they weren't carrying it alone. What none of them realized was that this was only the beginning of a story that would intertwine their lives in ways they could never have imagined. The next morning, sunlight broke through Grace's small bedroom window, but something about it felt different. She stared at the key still clutched in her hand, wondering if everything that had happened the night before had been real. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Caitlin, good morning. Today, a new beginning. Let me know when you're ready to see your new place." She read the text over and over, her heart pounding. It wasn't a dream, it was real. But as the reality sank in, so did her doubts. Why would someone like Caitlin Clark care about her? What if she wasn't good enough for this fresh start? Lisa and Ethan had stayed with her that night, unable to stop thanking her. But as they packed their bags to leave for their new shelter through the foundation, Lisa held Grace's hand tightly. "You're the reason I'm still here," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "Don't ever forget how much you matter." Grace smiled faintly, but her thoughts were racing. What if this was all a mistake? Later that afternoon, Caitlin met her outside the diner. Dressed casually in jeans and a sweatshirt, she leaned against her car, holding a bouquet of sunflowers. When Grace saw her, her breath caught in her throat. "These are for you," Caitlin said, handing her the flowers. "I thought you could use a reminder of how bright you are." Grace couldn't help but laugh, nervously shaking her head. "You're too much, you know that." Caitlin smirked, her eyes softening. "I've heard that before. Now, come on, let's get you settled." They drove to her new apartment, a cozy sunlit space that overlooked a small park. Grace gasped when she saw it. Her name on the lease, a fridge stocked with food, even little touches like a vase for the sunflowers. She turned to Caitlin, tears streaming down her face. "I don't deserve this," she choked out. Caitlin stepped closer, her voice low and steady. "You deserve everything good in this world, Grace. And I'm going to keep reminding you until you believe it." Over the next few weeks, their lives intertwined in ways Grace never expected. Caitlin wasn't just a fleeting presence. She became a constant in Grace's life. She would stop by the diner to check on her, invite her to basketball practices so Ethan could see his hero in action, and even sit with her late at night talking about their pasts. One evening, as they walked along the quiet streets of San Diego, Grace finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Who is she?" she asked softly. "The person you said you couldn't save." Caitlin's face darkened, her usually calm demeanor faltering. She looked away for a long moment before answering. "Her name was Jennifer," Caitlin said quietly. "She was my best friend growing up. We did everything together. She believed in me before anyone else did." Grace watched her carefully, listening. Caitlin exhaled slowly. "She got sick when we were in college. I tried to be there for her, but between school and basketball, I wasn't around as much as I should have been. And then one day, she was gone." Grace's heart shattered as she listened. She reached out, placing her hand on Caitlin's. "I'm so sorry, Caitlin. I can't even imagine." Caitlin nodded, her voice raw. "She was the kindest person I ever knew. And when I saw you with Ethan, it was like I could see her in you, that same light." Tears filled Grace's eyes as she realized the depth of Caitlin's pain. She squeezed her hand, her voice trembling. "You've carried so much alone." Caitlin looked at her, then something fragile in her expression. "Yeah," she admitted. "You don't have to anymore," Grace whispered. For the first time, Caitlin let her walls crumble. She told Grace about the night she spent wondering if she'd ever feel whole again, about the guilt that consumed her, and about how meeting Grace had reminded her of the beauty in small, selfless acts. Their bond deepened with every shared word, every unspoken moment of understanding. Caitlin became Grace's anchor, and in turn Grace became the light Caitlin hadn't realized she was searching for. But the world wasn't kind to moments like these. Rumors began to spread when paparazzi caught pictures of them together. Headlines twisted their story, calling Grace a gold digger, questioning Caitlin's motives. The noise was deafening, and for someone like Grace, who had spent her life in the background, it was overwhelming. One night she broke down, her voice shaking. "I don't think I can do this," she whispered. "I'm not strong enough for this world you live in." Caitlin's heart broke as she watched Grace crumble. She pulled her close, holding her tightly. "Grace," she whispered, "the world doesn't get to decide your worth. I see you, I'll always see you." But the pressure was relentless, and Grace couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong. One morning, Caitlin woke up to find a note on her doorstep. "Thank you for everything. You saved me, but I can't let you lose yourself in saving me too. Please don't come looking for me." Caitlin found the note hours later, her hands trembling as she read it. For the first time in years, she felt the unbearable weight of loss return, but this time, she wasn't willing to let it. When Caitlin stood in the doorway staring at Grace's note, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest, she had lost too much in her life, her best friend moments she could never get back, but losing Grace, that was a pain she wasn't willing to accept. She immediately called Eleanor, the woman who had helped Grace with her new apartment. "Do you know where she might have gone?" Caitlin asked, her voice trembling. Eleanor hesitated. "She mentioned wanting to go back home to Montana once, where her parents are buried." She said it was the only place she ever felt safe. Without a second thought, Caitlin was on a flight to Montana. The journey was a blur of memories, Grace's laughter, her selflessness, the way she always put others before herself. How could someone who carried so much light not see her own worth? When she arrived in the small town where Grace had grown up, the cold air stung her skin, but she didn't care. She stopped at the diner Grace had mentioned once, the one her parents used to take her to as a child, and there she was sitting at the counter staring at a half-empty cup of coffee. Caitlin approached quietly, her heart racing. "Grace," she said softly. Grace turned, her eyes widening in shock. How did you find me?" Caitlin sat down beside her, her voice firm, but filled with emotion. "You left me a note. Did you really think I wouldn't come after you?" Tears spilled down Grace's cheeks as she shook her head. "Caitlin, you don't understand the media, the rumors. They're not wrong, I don't belong in your world. I'm just me and nobody. Caitlin reached for her hands, holding them tightly. Stop, don't you dare say that. Grace looked away, her chest tight. Lightning, you don't get it. I don't want to drag you down. You deserve someone who fits into your life, not someone who hides from it. Caitlin cued her face, gently forcing her to meet her gaze. You fit into my life, Grace, not because of what you do or how the world sees you, but because of your heart. Her voice broke. You think I saved you, but you saved me. You reminded me that love, kindness, and hope still exist. Grace sobbed, shaking her head. I'm so scared. So am I, Caitlin admitted. But isn't that what makes this real? She took a deep breath. We've both lost so much, Grace. But maybe, just maybe, we've been given a second chance to find something beautiful again. Grace collapsed into her arms, her tears soaking Caitlin's sweatshirt. And for the first time in years, she let herself believe she was worthy of love. Over the next few weeks, Caitlin stayed by Grace's side in Montana, helping her rebuild her confidence piece by piece. She shielded her from the harsh glare of the media, standing up for her in interviews, speaking openly about her kindness, her strength. She's not a nobody, Caitlin told the world. She's the kind of person we all should aspire to be. As time passed, Grace began to see herself through Caitlin's eyes. They returned to San Diego together, but this time they weren't just two people whose paths had crossed. They were partners bound by love, by loss, by the understanding that sometimes life brings you exactly who you need, even if you never saw it coming. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Caitlin took Grace to the park near her apartment. Ethan and Lisa were there watching from a distance. Grace smiled, turning toward Caitlin. What are we doing here? She asked. Caitlin took a deep breath, and then she got down on one knee, holding out a small, simple ring. Grace's hand flew to her mouth, her heart hammering in her chest. Grace, Caitlin said, her voice thick with emotion. You've taught me how to live again. You've shown me that love doesn't have to be perfect to be real. Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving to you just how extraordinary you are? Tears streamed down Grace's face. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, 1,000 times yes. As they embraced, Ethan cheered, and Lisa wiped away tears of joy. The world may not have understood their love, but in that moment, it didn't matter. Caitlin and Grace had found something that transcended fame, pain, and the judgment of others. A love built on compassion, resilience, the belief that even broken hearts could find their way back to wholeness, and this time, they weren't going to let go. Like this video and subscribe this channel. Thank you.